Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Incas in our continuing study of the history of civilization. The Inca Empire stretched over the west section of the continent of South America, from the equator south, far south, hundreds of miles south, along the ocean, but also remember that's a highly mountainous area. Their empire used stone construction and yet without mortar, and that means that each building had to be carefully fitted where the stones would sit upon and up against each other, interlocking, and yet without any mortar to hold them together. Likewise, they had a series of roads, and yet these roads, unlike the Roman roads, which are usually over flat and level ground, these roads will twist and turn as they go up high mountains in order to unite this very diverse empire. The Incas have no system of writing, and that means that they are unique among all of the other civilizations that we have thus far encountered, because a civilization, by its very definition, will be culture and people and buildings and writing, and yet the Incas are the exception to that rule, because they had no system of writing. They did have a system of keeping records, that is, of counting different things. They would use ropes and knots, and you could count how many lambs or sheep, or well, they didn't have lambs or sheep, how many llamas they had, or how many potatoes they had, or whatever thing they are counting. But you had to know which thing is being counted. They had a word for it. They didn't have any written word for any of these things. So no system of writing. Here's an example of some bridge building technique. Notice it's suited for the very high altitude in order to, because as you're going from mountain to mountain, there are valleys and rivers and all sorts of things to be crossed if you're going to have any empire that's united. Machu Picchu would be the center, but not the sole city that united this vast empire together. And this would come crashing down in the days of Francisco Pizarro. His first contact with the Incas was in 1526, so this is while Columbus is still doing some of his things. He takes 13 men and he goes into the jungles of South America, and he discovers a barge on one of the rivers, and then he returns to Spain with the idea of coming back with a greater force. 13, after all, he's not going to do that much with them. And so he comes back about 4 years later, a second expedition. This time he has 162 horsemen and 106 foot soldiers, and he's going to face an entire empire with that collection of soldiery. In the interim, apparently there had been some contact, because smallpox had beat him to Peru in that 4-year period. That disease had its impact, and not only smallpox was ravaging the people, but the country itself had entered a period of civil war. You had Atahualpa in the north and Huascar in the south. These two were fighting for control, and Pizarro, he linked himself with Atahualpa. They had a meeting, and Pizarro had brought a priest with him with the intent of leading them to Jesus. And so he shows them the Bible. Now remember, this is a culture that's they don't have a written language. They've never seen a book. They've never seen writing. They look at that thing and they say, what's that? That's just, it's just these funny little paper things. And they treat it with disrespect. Now you see, if our story had ended there, they meet with the priest and they spoke with it and they didn't understand things and they all lived happily ever after, that would be a great story. But that's not the way the story ends. Instead, they threw the Bible to the ground, and Pizarro takes offense, and he takes Atahualpa as a hostage. Now, remember, he's got a couple of hundred men, some horses, and they'd never seen horses. This was a brand new thing, and they've never seen armor, and they've never seen the sort of metal weapons that the Europeans have. But he takes Atahualpa as hostage and says, "I will return him if you give a ransom in gold, I need enough gold to fill this entire room. And the Incas set about to fill the room with gold, because one thing they had a lot of was gold. Remember the gold bracelets that Columbus first saw when he landed in the Americas? That wasn't mined in the Caribbean. That was found in on the continent, and it had apparently been brought in the form of these little tiny bracelets. Well, a ransom is demanded of a room full of gold. Atahualpa subsequently is killed, and they threaten him with, they're going to kill him, they threaten him with burning him alive, and so that he won't be burned alive, he converts. I don't know how real the conversion was, and this really sort of speaks of where the church was. I'm not saying Christianity, because I don't think this has a lot to do with Christianity, but this was the thinking of the church. Well, we're going to burn you because you're a pagan idol worshiper. Well, in that case, I'll convert, and that way they're going to kill him by strangling him. It's still, I think, a dark spot on what was supposed to be a Christian culture, and frankly, I look at it and it doesn't sound all that Christian to me. Well, the Incas attacked, and as we said, this is an entire civilization attacking these couple of hundred men, and they've got an army of 200,000 to come up against these Europeans. But because of disease, and also because of these seemingly almost magical weapons, these horses, these iron swords, this armor, by the time the dust settles, the population of the Incas has decreased by 95%. Now, there's still a lot of people left. But think about how many had died due to disease and to warfare. Now, we mentioned already Mexico and Cortez, but the conquistadors go all throughout both North and South America. We have Ponce de Leon, who the story goes that he's looking for the Fountain of Youth and gives name to the peninsula of Florida, that is a flowery place. You have Hernando de Soto, who is the first European to come across the Mississippi. You have Coronado, the first European to lay eyes on the Grand Canyon. All of these with their discoveries, you have an impact upon them. First of all, the European economy had this sudden influx of gold, and you think, oh, that's wonderful, it's going to make Europe so very, very rich. But actually, it has just the opposite effect. Yes, it meant that for a time, the King of Spain had lots of money, but only for a time, because land values decreased. If everybody had gold, then the prices of everything are going to go down, including land. You're going to have inflation. In fact, Spain will go eventually from being one of the very richest countries to being bankrupt because of this inflation. You also begin to see the effects of industrialization as we find better and better ways of building things and communicating that across the Atlantic. And of course, we've already referenced the diseases that take place, but the impact of the explorers can really be seen in three areas. They were after gold, and we've mentioned this already, gold and glory and God. And not necessarily in that order. It depends upon who was coming. There were those that were coming for glory. There were those that were coming for gold. But there were also those who had spiritual reasons for coming. And as we're speaking about the Spanish and the Roman Catholics at this point, you have, for example, the Jesuits who came with a very different mindset. They weren't interested in the gold or the glory of this life, but they wanted to preach the gospel. They wanted to tell this new population about Jesus. And they came and they did that.